we still got some more people trickling in here that are going to be speaking. But hey, so while we're waiting for everybody to kind of trickle in, there's a lot of controversy around the emails that we received and the podcast that we released. And, I just want to say it was very timely. And we did receive the emails, and, we'll do our best that we can to prove that tonight. But, I released this early. Sam had an email roll in that got to Jeremy, my producer, and, we released it. And I think we did the right thing. There's a lot of distrust within the government. There's a lot of distrust within, especially the FBI. And we've seen attack after attack, the Vegas shooting. We saw the Covenant disaster that happened at the school, and none of these manifestos ever get released. And so we wanted to make sure that this thing got released. It did get released, and through our show. And nobody seems to trust the mainstream media anymore. And I think I did the right thing. I know I did the right thing. And even after that, we immediately got the information to the FBI so that they can do whatever they need to do with it, which is hopefully dig into this and find what the hell was going on. But um, so we got a whole list of speakers here tonight. I'll just make some introductions here. Shawn Ryan here, former Navy SEAL, former CIA contractor, host Shawn Ryan Show. Then we got my producer, Jeremy Watkins, retired surface warfare officer in the Navy. We got Sam Shoemate, which everybody knows, the Army Intel Warrant Officer. Scott Mann will be in here soon. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Green Beret, very tied into intelligence. Former CIA analyst slash targeter. Sarah Adams, who I'm sure everybody knows. We have Jordan Carr, former Air Force intelligence. Rob Green, active duty surface warfare officer, is in here. He'll be speaking tonight. He's the one that actually got the story to us, to Jeremy. We got Kyle Seraphin, former FBI. We got Tim Parlatore, former Navy JAG officer and my current attorney. We got Dale Stark, who will be joining us, who also interviewed Sam, I believe, right about 24 hours after I interviewed him. Dale's a former A-10 pilot and drone pilot. We got, excuse me if I say this wrong, Matt Tardio, former Green Beret. Tim Burchett will be joining us. He's a congressman out of Knoxville, Tennessee. He sent me a message that said he also received some emails from, it sounds like, from him. So he's going to come on hopefully and speak tonight. He's also put a lot of stuff in motion within Congress to stop the massive funding that the government's doing in the Taliban. And we discussed that several times on my show with Scott Mann, Sarah Adams, and Tim Burchett, and Eli Crane, and Legend, and Masood, who is the commander of the NRF, National Resistance Front in Afghanistan, fighting off the Taliban. We have Guido, who's a former Dutch intel officer and the author of AQ 2.0. And lastly, we have the anti-hero podcast guys coming on. Brent Tucker, he's former Delta operator, and he also received an email on their podcast from the bomber, and sent that to me so that we could scrub our tens of thousands of messages that we get on there, to see if we received social media traffic from Matthew Livelsberger, and we did, both on the Shawn Ryan account, my personal account, and on Shawn Ryan Show Instagram. So, which we posted those. So, I know there's a lot of other people that want to come on here, but there's a lot of kind of rhetoric going on online about this, and everybody that's on here that's going to get a chance to speak is a true professional. I only deal with professionals. I don't deal with internet trolls. I'm not going to deal with that kind of shit. So everybody that you'll be listening to tonight is a real professional in one way or another. So already went through why I released it, but and kind of how that came about. So just to tell that story again for everybody that's kind of chiming in. Walked in the morning when I was getting ready to interview. Jeremy, my co-host, told me about the story. Said that Sam really did not want to come on the show and was really kind of nervous to do it. So we applied a little bit of pressure and kind of talked him into it because all three of us thought it was really important, and he could have been spending time with his family that he was flying to go see at the time. But we talked him into coming on. We thought it was really important, and so he came on. We talked him into coming on. I conducted an interview with a medical doctor that day. Then when I got done, my phone was blown up with messages from people that have been contacted by Army CID, which is basically the Army's version of the FBI. And where's my notes here? So just for the record, we were contacted, and these are just the people that are probably in here right now listening. But CID contacted Tim Kennedy, texted me about it, and got me in touch with David Butler, who is the public affairs officer of the chief, the Joint Chief of Staff of the Army. And so I got in touch. I got Butler's contact info, gave it to Jeremy and my attorney, Tim Parlatore, to contact him. I didn't want to talk to him. I don't trust any of these people. Jeremy and Tim will talk on that here in a few minutes. The Scott Mann was contacted by CID and contacted me. Chris Peranto was contacted by CID and got in contact with me. Bo Ebenson, who used to video my show, was contacted by Clay Jensen, who was contacted by CID, and then the actual operative that we redacted from the show, which is why you see the whatever those are, those little lines that show spelling errors and the cursor. We had to redact some stuff out of that email to. We didn't want to blow anybody's cover. Like I said, I'm a professional. I've worked in intelligence, obviously, and no matter what the story is, I am absolutely 100% not going to blow an operative's cover, especially when he is currently serving overseas. That's just absolutely asinine for anybody to do that. And so that gets us kind of into the email. That's why the email, we had copied and pasted the email into Apple Notes to redact that name and the name of the major that was in there. And so when we did that, it automatically showed spelling errors. And if that makes any sense to anybody, and the space at the bottom where the picture, where there's like a little blank space, that's where the coordinates were. We pulled that and put it in a separate screen in the video so that you guys could see that in a way that was blown up a little bit, so it was a little bit more visible. The cursor that showed up that was in the screenshot, again, that's because it was in notes, so that we could screenshot or redact the names and put that in the actual episode and release it so that everybody could see that. And I want to say that the reason. Look, obviously, Livelsberger had some stuff that he wanted to get out, and we had mentioned at the beginning of the show that we could not verify that any of this stuff that was in that email was actually true or not, but we thought it was important to get it out to the public because if it would have went to the FBI, guess what, guys? It probably would have never hit the public. And like I'd mentioned at the beginning of this, there's been time and time again where people want manifestos released. Covenant School shooting here in Nashville is a perfect example. Everybody wanted that released, and they wouldn't release it. Now everybody's pissed off because we released the fucking email, and so we did say that at the very beginning of the podcast that we couldn't verify if the information there was accurate, but there were a lot of things that lined up, like the operative that wanted his name redacted. He also hit me on LinkedIn. We had to black his name out, black his phone number out. Like I said, I'm not going to blow anybody's cover. That's just a big no-no in the intel world. So hopefully there's at least a couple people out there that can respect the fact that we um, pulled through for him and did not blow his cover. But anyways, Jeremy, I'm going to kick it over to you here for a minute. And is Tim on here yet?
He is. I've got to get Jordan in as a co-host to help me out here. Can you add that while I pass it over to Sam real quick?
Yeah.
You passing it off to me now, Jeremy?
Yes, please.
Okay. Didn't get a framework for what I'd be saying here tonight, so I'm kind of winging it right now. I just posted a screen record. I recommend you go look at my timeline. I screen recorded my Proton Mail app, and I walked through the timeline. I dropped everything down as specific as I possibly could to show when this stuff came in, okay? There's been a lot of big names and influencers out there coming after my credibility, attacking me, claiming that I fabricated this email. Of all the things you could attack me for, fabrication of the email doesn't make sense to me simply because so many people have seen it at this point. The FBI has commented on it and everything else, but that is what it is. So they've come after me personally, attacking me, and I basically made the conjecture, and I want to get this single point across tonight. When you watch that video and you show the timeline, and there's no squiggle lines or anything else, this is a direct screen record of my Proton Mail app. And when you see the timeline, you will see that this person, who is either Matt or claims to be Matt, reached out to me on Sunday after they first contacted me on Instagram. They reached out on Sunday and sent that first message. You can read it directly in there. Everything is very easy to read. I spent plenty of time recording this. You go to the next message, and he gives the manifesto. He breaks down the manifesto, and that was on Tuesday, December 31st. Now, here's the thing. There are three options in my mind. Either I'm a fortune teller, and I can see the future, and I knew that he was going to do this thing, and I fabricated these emails to send them to myself before the action with proven timestamps, or I'm a deep state operative. I'm part of the CIA or whatever spooky services out there, and this was a very well coordinated and put together scheme to psyop the country, or I'm exactly who I say I am. I'm a recently retired Army veteran who has run a military whistleblower social media page for the last 4.5 years. I have dozens of articles that mention my name in them, and anybody who's halfway decent at doing a little bit of a deep dive can look into that and see that there are years of articles with my name mentioned in them as a source or whatever else. I would tend to go with the latter, but I understand how the internet is, and I want you to understand that a lot of the nonsense you're seeing out there is based on poor research, such as the squiggly lines on the Apple Notes page. You know, this stuff could have been. I understand conspiracies, though, so I'll leave you with that. Whoever's up next, go ahead and take it, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. I'll say this last thing. I've tried to be as transparent as possible. I've given headers. I don't understand a lot of these things. So as far as somebody explained to give the headers from it, and basically all it did was say that it was a Proton Mail to a Proton Mail. I've taken screenshots of the box. I just recorded the video earlier. I've done everything I can to show you that this email was factually sent to me on these dates from this person who claims to be Matt Livelsberger, an individual who I didn't care about, that meant nothing to me until I read the news the next day. Well, until technically somebody sent me the news 2 days after the fact in the morning. But that name meant nothing to me, and I ignored the email initially until I saw, wow, this guy in my email is the same guy allegedly who committed these attacks. I'll leave you with that.
Shawn, do you mind if I jump in there?
Yeah, 1 second. I just want to say too that Vegas PD was aware of the email that we received on the podcast and talked about on the podcast, and they specifically said that they have strong evidence to me that the email was sent prior to the death. And we also received the email in my Zendesk, which is our customer service support that's attached to the website. We posted that. We posted the email from my G's personal on SRS. Brent Tucker, like I said, from the Anti-Hero podcast, sent me the email that they received from it. Tim Burchett, who hopefully is in here at some point, is going to talk about emails he received. But yeah, Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm going to start off by saying this: like, you guys 1,000% did the right thing by releasing that information in the time manner in which you did, and in the manner in which you did. You just presented it as you knew it being factual to you, that you guys ended up getting that email, that it came through, and it's a good thing that you did that, because now we have people from Anti-Hero, that have searched their inbox and are seeing similar messages as to what you had posted earlier about the email that you had received as it comes through. It's important in that aspect for people to keep in mind because of one of two things. Either number one, and I think Shu ended up coming out with like a very good way of framing this, that either Livelsberger, or who was allegedly Livelsberger, that ended up sending that email. I think it's very important to keep in that context. When we start analyzing this and we start looking at it, and the reason I'm happy it's documented and has been put out the way in which it did, is if it ends up coming out that Livelsberger is not the one that ended up generating that email, then we have a lot of questions, because we do have timestamps, we do have the dates in which those emails were sent ahead of time. So if there is a conspiracy that's involved in this, if everyone wants to put on or take off their tinfoil hat, I don't care. But if there is a conspiracy that's involved in it, you did the right thing by making sure that it is documented ahead of time for all of that to be put out. If it's not a conspiracy theory and Livelsberger did in fact send those messages, that's documented as well, and we have that on record. So that's very important to understand. The other thing that I'd like to bring up is, my role, my involvement as it goes into this situation with being a former team member, albeit for a very short period of time with Matt. But in addition to that, the information that got disclosed to me ahead of time, back in December, times two, that's twice, of active duty Green Berets who are associated not with just myself, but also Livelsberger as well. And that information should not be public record. Like Shawn is saying, we're not going to go about and disclose information of people who are currently, out there doing the Lord's work for our nation. But those are all factual things that have been reported, and you're more than welcome to look into it. And so there, in my opinion, at least, there's a lot more that's going on here than to what meets the eye. And I'm not jumping into a conspiracy theory by any means, but I'm very happy that Shawn Ryan, I am happy that Jeremy, I'm happy that Shu, everybody was able to come forward with this information and present it, because however the cards may fall from this point forward, you guys did honest reporting on what it was that you had at the time that you had it. If people want to throw in conspiracy theories about squiggly lines, so on and so forth, et cetera, that's on them, and they're going to have to defend their own BS afterwards. You guys have your own records, you have your own documents, and you would be stupid to try to go forward and pretend like those emails didn't exist, that you didn't receive them, because obviously people like Anti-Hero Podcast, obviously, other people are going to start coming forward as they dig through their inboxes and then end up finding them. So I'm going to leave it at that for the time now.
Hey, Shawn, can you add Jeremy back as a co-host? And real quick, for people that are requesting to speak, it's looking a little glitchy on my end. It might be the same on Jeremy's, which is probably why he was dropped. So please be patient.
Hey, let me add something before we continue any further. And I should have said this at the very beginning of the Shawn Ryan podcast, and I should have said this at the very beginning tonight. But I want to make this very clear. Matt kind of reminded me of this. Whatever Matt was dealing with, whatever Matt Livelsberger was dealing with, as far as where he was at in his headspace, he was somebody's family member. He was somebody's teammate. He had friends. He had family. Like, I want to offer my condolences to those folks right off the bat, because I deal with service members. I have been for years dealing with service members who are struggling from moral injury from what we've gone through for decades in combat. moral injury from the Afghan withdrawal. What I've been told is that he was struggling with stuff. And whatever the case was, this was a human being who served his country honorably for years. And I don't want to take away from that. And I want his family and friends to know that, hey, my deepest condolences to you. And if I said anything or I did anything disrespectful to dishonor him, I apologize immediately. So I want everybody to know that. I am in no way attacking this guy, but I felt like the information was so important it had to come forward. And I just want to say that.
Yeah, and I'd like to add on top of that, Shu, like in addition to that, he's a very well-respected and dedicated Green Beret. From the time in service that I knew him to all of the people that I'm currently talking to that, do know him on a professional level right now, they have absolutely nothing but good things to say. Whether or not the issues with this family are factual, that is up for debate at this current point in time. But from everybody's general standpoint, until something official gets put out, I would just ask that in an attempt to ease some pain and suffering that's taking place within that family, to let that kind of go away and just focus on the facts at hand versus rumor intelligence that's going to end up smearing or, clouding information and actual facts that are taking place.
Appreciate that, gents. Jeremy, is Tim in yet?
He is. We're trying to get him a speaker credit here. In the meantime, if I can just ask Kyle to talk about the process for sending the note to the FBI and why that
That got glitchy, but I got the gist of it. What, if you don't mind, Jeremy, I'm actually going to toss it over to Rob Green since he called me on Thursday, and I'll just let him say how he introduced me into any of this.
Yeah, appreciate that. Now, for context, real quick, I think my role here was very small, just connecting dots, connecting people. But I do, the reason I was involved in this is because of going back with Sam now for several years and trying to get at DOD corruption. I mean, the Department of Defense is sort of the gorilla in the room as it goes to government overreach and some of the problems that we have. And so we've seen now for years senior military leaders, our admirals and generals, harming service members, trampling their rights, betraying their trust. And then we have whistleblowers that they go after, they retaliate against. And so that's how I got connected with Sam and how we started building out networks of whistleblowers, networks of sources, trying to help hold people accountable however we could do it internally at first. And we realized that the institution, our admirals and generals, they protect themselves, they protect their careers, they protect the institution before the Constitution. And so we started going to the American people as much as we could. So that's the role, how we got connected. And then that morning, after Sam was informed that, hey, this is the same guy, he reached out to me to get in touch. He knew that I had contact with Jeremy because Jeremy and I connected over the COVID vaccine mandates in the military a couple of years before that. So he knew that I was in contact with him. So he asked to get in contact with Shawn Ryan. And then that's where, as Sam and I were talking through it that morning, the best thing to do, I said, hey, let's take a pause on this. Don't just call, FBI field office cold. Let me pull in Kyle. Kyle and I have connected. He's done an awesome job for so many of us service members and DOD whistleblowers, helping us raise awareness on some of the things going on in the DOD. I mean, he's doing an awesome job in the FBI too, but he's lending some of his support to us in the DOD as well. So I made sure to say, hey, Kyle's going to point us in the right direction. He knows the players here. And so I was able to connect Kyle to Sam to make sure that we got this into the right hands because there's still a lot of good FBI agents out there. And so that's a good point at which to kick it over to you, Kyle.
Sure. Sounds good. Okay. So by way of background, I worked for the FBI from 2016. I got out. Actually, I was suspended forever in late April of 2022. I was eventually removed, or I think they threatened me with termination, and I quote unquote resigned after 14 months of no pay and not being able to show up. I'd sold my house. I left the area where I was supposed to be working because I didn't work there anymore. That was April of 2023. I launched a podcast. I went on some interviews and stuff like that. So that's kind of who I am. Before all that happened, I did whistleblower activity that brought some things to Congress. I brought some things privately. Some of them actually are getting more and more relevant, and I'm going to probably bring this up later on with some other people. But the stuff that Sarah's talking about right now, some of the infiltration, some of the things that have come into our country were relevant to me back in 2021, and I brought that information to Congress, including the Afghan refugees. So that's kind of who I am. But the most important thing is that during that time, this was a combination of whistleblower activity and the fact that we were saying no thank you to the COVID vaccine, which a lot of people in the FBI lost their jobs, or at least they were threatened with them. I rounded up a group of people that were willing to kind of go on the line and say, hey, I'm not going to do this. And also, we're going to support each other. And it was upwards of 300 people. It was a signal group. I'm sure it was infiltrated by the FBI's investigations, the internal inspection division. But what we found were a lot of people that were willing to step up and say, here's some information about what's going on wrong. These were all policy things. I got to have a pretty robust group of folks that understood right and wrong. Let's just leave it at that. So when Rob called me on Thursday morning, this is going back at the beginning or last week, Thursday morning, 8:45, I'm sitting at the breakfast table. Rob calls. He said, hey, you know Sam? I said, yeah, I know of Sam. We haven't spoken before, but I understand what Sam's about, and I understand that he's reputable. He's like, he's got this piece of information. It needs to get into the FBI's hands. Can you babysit this into the right spot? Can you make a connection so we're not just throwing it into what's called NTALK? If you guys don't know, if you go to the tip line, it goes to West Virginia. It goes to a low-level analyst. It could get lost in the thing. If you're not sending him a January 6th lead, it probably just disappears. So you want to make sure you get it into the right hands. I said, yeah, give me a few minutes. I'll get back to you with the number. Made a couple calls, called some of those agents from that 300 group that I was talking about, and started saying, hey, find me a reputable CT agent. Initially, I thought we needed to go to Denver because I thought that's where Matt was based out of. Eventually, they actually ended up getting me an agent, which was the supervisor in charge of the squad in Las Vegas. And the reason I'm giving you this background and the timeline is because there's a couple things that happened. Right after I found somebody in Vegas, which ended up being the squad supervisor that's doing the investigation into the explosion at Trump Tower, I talked to Sam, and his first statement to me was, I don't want to do this, and I don't really want to take it public. In fact, I would love to just give it to Shawn Ryan, let them run with it, but they're probably not going to want to just take something in a vacuum. And I told him, yeah, you're going to want to get out there and put your face on it, even though you don't necessarily want to do that. And Sam's initial thing that he told me, this was in the first 10 minutes we spoke, is that essentially everyone's going to call him part of the Glow Fed op, because that's what happens if you bring information forward. The problem that we're dealing with right now is so much distrust in the American media and the social media environment, and so many people feel like they've been betrayed by our government, that they look around and they say, we want transparency. And then when someone acts transparently, you're like, oh, you're in on it, because it's not exactly what you wanted to hear. And you're looking to punch through. Everybody wants to find the PSYOP, but maybe the PSYOP is that you just don't believe honest people. So I just want to tell you from the beginning, that's what Sam brought forward. And he was 100% credible to me on that. He never shared the document with me, which is on purpose. And I had to share that with the FBI. I didn't want to know. It was none of my damn business at that time. And I was not really interested in the details. I knew I could wait until Shawn and Sam sat down and had the conversation and shared it with the world. Now, here's the really important part about this stuff. If you just give something into the black hole that is the FBI, even with a warm lead, and you give it over to the supervisor, the SSA, in charge of the counterterrorism squad in Las Vegas, if they start asking questions and they start pushing down on someone like a Sam and say, hey, this is why we want you to keep that quiet, there's the possibility that that happens. And there are certain types of coercive behavior they could ask for, or they could sort of indicate. The upside of what Sam did was that he told them that he already had agreed to do, a public expose, that he intended to publish it and share it because it's the people's information and he's a private citizen. He also said the same thing on Twitter. He said the same thing when he was out talking to Shawn. So all of these things are really relevant. The craziest thing for me is when I was on the phone with the folks at the Bureau, and this is an indication of where we're at right now. And this is why you have to share stuff publicly to people. The people that I talked to at the FBI, one, they didn't know who Shawn Ryan was. And to me, that's actually fairly mind-blowing, to the point where I got a phone call the next day, and I've shared it with Jeremy, who's up here on stage. I shared it with Shawn. There is audio of them calling and asking for a confirmation of the spelling of Shawn Ryan's first name because they wanted to make sure they were thinking of the right Shawn Ryan. And then they asked me very explicitly, we don't know how podcasts work. This was the agent that was doing the interview. Can you tell me, how did the interview process work? Do they do them live? Are they taped? How do you do it? I'm like, I'm not Shawn Ryan and I don't do his podcast, but I know how it works because I've seen it and I'm pretty confident they tape it and they edit it because he's got 3 camera angles. So, you're going to have to talk to Shawn about that, guys. The fact that you would have a federal investigator, an 1811 series with a top secret clearance working in counterterrorism, who claims not to know what the word VBIT is, or at least the initials of it, doesn't understand how podcasts work in 2025. You'd think that that is stranger than fiction right now. But that's part of the reason why it has to be shared and why you need to have this stuff in the public, because they applied pressure that you're not able to do otherwise. They did something that we didn't see at the Covenant School out there in Tennessee. It's stuff that doesn't get happen, like the Pulse nightclub. All of these kind of people who have written some kind of document, left some sort of format, and then we left it in the hands of the feds. You get this like convoluted bullshit because they do not feel like they owe you an explanation. That's the downside of the federal intelligence and the federal law enforcement side. They don't actually think they owe Americans anything. And if you guys have watched how they've behaved over the last couple of years, it's my single biggest gripe. This is America's information. They act like an intel agency, and that their intelligence is basically a one-way street. And so what these guys did is really, really important. And I listened right at the beginning because I wanted to hear how it was presented. The presentation was as follows. It was the same thing that was said to me. We can't verify 100% what this is. Some of the information checks out. And if you're doing your job, and I think Shawn did a great job of doing this, it's like, trust the audience. Here's some information. Here's a data point. Go out there and think what you want. He didn't tell you what to think. I listened. Sam didn't tell you what to think. And when he was making a speculation or giving his opinion, it was very clearly stated. This is my opinion. Here's what I think happened. Here's what might be the case. Here's some speculation. That's how intel people talk, folks. They talk in degrees of confidence. They don't talk about this definitely happened, because who knows? We're talking about a digital trail. So that was the thing. Again, we have audio showing that the Bureau got this information, and I just want to bring up the insanity. He gave you kind of a couple different possibilities of being in part of the PSYOP or whatever. If you present information to the FBI while they're in the middle of a national spotlight criminal investigation, or a counterterrorism investigation, or something that involves explosives like this, and you present false evidence, you probably find yourself afoul of 18 U.S.C. 1001, which we usually refer to as the quote-unquote lying to the FBI, but it's referred to as false statements. If you give them fraudulent and knowingly fraudulent evidence, you're probably looking at least a low-level felony. Whether they'll charge it or not is another animal. That is a fully crazy thing for someone who walks around and has spent 20 years with a top secret clearance, who has worked in the intelligence space, who is not a dumb person, and Sam is clearly not. All you have to do is sort of look at his body of work. This is why you go, okay, fine. So this email obviously got there. The question is what does it mean? Who actually wrote it? Are they impersonating, or are they legit? Was this someone in the middle of a mental health crisis, which was something that Sam and I talked about in the first 10 minutes? If you have a decent profile, and you have the name, if you have a DOD background, if you have a law enforcement background, people send you a lot of mental illness. And so it's really hard to suss out, hey, is this legit, or is this something that is just somebody's crazy fantasy? And a lot of times we don't engage with it. The fact that Sam actually engaged with this and got a little back and forth, it is a net good, a net positive for transparency, and it's a net good for the American people. That's all I'm gonna that's it. And if you guys ever want to play the audio, Shawn, it's all yours.
Yeah, I'll actually post that audio after this live stream here. Kyle, I'm just curious. I mean, we're talking about they're not releasing anything. We talked about previous crimes that they've never released the manifesto, and it wound up getting leaked. Why do you think they haven't released all the information themselves that we presented them as soon as we got it?
So this, unlike a local law enforcement, people are used to seeing some big investigations, maybe a local shooting or like a mass shooting. What they'll expect is that there's a police chief, and that person answers to a mayor, and that person gets elected by, a pretty small group of folks. And those people want to know the answers. Same story with state police. They answer to state representatives. That can actually be handled pretty aggressively at a local level. And so a groundswell of interest is actually going to move the needle. The FBI is not burdened by that. They have an $11 billion budget, give or take, from Congress. You've seen the way that the deputy director, that's the number 2, and the director of the FBI go out in front of Congress, and they thwart oversight. They just they don't even want to talk about things that are obvious and should be answered. Not even in closed session, you find out. They don't feel accountable to the American people, and that's the reason why, it's a massive problem with what is the FBI at this point. It's why we don't have answers about what happened at Butler, PA, not in a way that makes everyone feel really good about it. It's why we don't have answers about what happened at Mar-a-Lago or the golf course down in Florida. Any of these things are of national interest, but you'll notice is that it's a black bag. And people who've worked in local law enforcement know exactly what I'm talking about. The FBI tends to be a one-way street. It's like, thanks for the information. We're never going to tell you anything more. And that is a cultural thing. So you shouldn't expect it, at least not right now. There's no air of transparency. They're essentially a no factory. I've got a couple of open FOIA lawsuits where I've sued the Bureau for information that I know exists because people have told me what it was. And they won't surrender it, even though we know. And I've asked Congress members to help us out because it's about them and they don't want to get involved because it's ugly. It's going to make them look, kind of silly. At the end of the day, you have a culture of people that are working to say no. They're either going to hide it behind classification or they're going to hide it behind exceptions to the FOIA, which is the Freedom of Information Act. They will use this ad nauseum and they will make you fight. My attorney and I have done at least a year's worth of litigation simply to get the opening and the closing of a slideshow called Congressional Investigations into the FBI by the 118th Congress, which I know is full of unprofessional information. 100% sure because I know people that were in the presentation and saw it. There's video of it and they showed me them setting up the podium. And that's all I've ever gotten from them. So these people don't want to share this information. Again, what you guys did was pressure them and made them acknowledge that something exists because there was no way around it because your platform is big enough to actually do the squeeze. So double down again. Sam and Shawn did the right thing. And the fact that you guys get to even have a discussion about it as like the American people, that wouldn't be happening without this.
I appreciate that. Hey, I want to move over to Jeremy and Tim Parlatore. You guys spoke with the public affairs officer from the Joint Chief of Staff of the Army. How did that conversation go?
Well, that was one of the weirdest conversations I've ever had with a public affairs officer. I mean, going to the authenticity of this, they obviously were, very desperate to reach out to us. So, they certainly had some information. But then once I got the guy on the phone, he really didn't seem to have the concept of what the content of the email was, and he really, obviously is trying to protect the reputation of the army, but really what he was pushing me on was to say that, hey, this guy was a very well respected soldier, and everybody, they've interviewed everybody, up and down his chain of command, and they all respected him. They all said that nobody saw this coming. He was a really fantastic soldier. He was going to do great things once he got out of the army, and he was very explicit to me that he was concerned, or I guess the Army Public Affairs was concerned, that if this email was kind of a rambling, incoherent, mental health break, that it could be something put out to the general public, who would get the impression that, and this is his exact quote to me: "If you join the Army, you're going to get fucked up." And so he was very much wanting to make sure that Shawn wasn't going to feed the narrative that if you enlist in the army that you're going to end up as a completely damaged person, which of course indicates he doesn't really listen to Shawn that much. But it was just a very, very bizarre conversation. He offered that if we wanted to talk to people within the chain of command to get a clearer picture of what a wonderful soldier he was, we could. And it was overall very odd back and forth.
Yeah, I just want to say, just so everybody knows, I mean, how seriously I take this. I brought Tim Parlatore on board at like 8 p.m. that night just to make sure I was doing the right thing. We checked into things. We looked at the email together. We verified that there was an incident in 2019 that did happen. And and I've done that with a number of episodes with you, Tim. I've sent you
Yep.
things and had you listen to it and say, hey, are we good to go with this? And 9 times out of 10, you give me the go ahead. So, thank you.
Of course. Yeah. Now, Shawn is always very careful with these things. And he called me up that night with something that definitely wasn't on my bingo card for the week. And, we went through it. We pulled the UN report on the 2019 incident, and, we're able to verify that. Um, and then once we had that information, that's when I reached out to the Army Public Affairs officer and got his info.
Appreciate it, Tim. Matt, you got a question?
Yeah, the information that you all had stated on the podcast about the PIO, I believe it was Shu that ended up saying that the PIO had said that the DNA did not match his child. Did they actually come out and publicly make that statement, or did they just leave you all hanging with that?
No, so that was something that it was a very odd kind of statement to me because yeah, as he's telling me about what a wonderful soldier he was, I kind of said, well, so what do you think this was? And he said, well, I don't want to speculate, but there might have been problems with his family, and then he tells me the story that when the FBI went to go identify the body, that to get a DNA match, they went to his closest next of kin, which is his infant child, and that the DNA did not match. And so they were speculating, well, maybe he got in a fight with his wife and found out that she was cheating on him. And I have no idea if that's true. I mean, quite
And
frankly, the two problems I have with that story: one, this guy is an active duty Army Special Forces soldier. They have his DNA on file to identify. You don't need to go to the next of kin. And two, if the child really isn't his, what mom in her right mind is going to offer up the illegitimate child for a DNA test in this case? So,
right.
and then I looked at the news reports and I saw that an hour earlier she had come out and said, "Oh no, I broke up with him because he was cheating on me." And
Mhm.
so it struck me as more spin than anything.
Well, and Tim, here's my other problem with that. And I think Shawn and a lot of the other people that are up here on this panel can all agree and concur with this is that being a Green Beret, dealing with infidelity, dealing with marital issues is par for the course. Like that's not something that
Yeah.
causes GBs to spin out of control and go set off a damn suicide bomb over inside of Las Vegas at Trump Hotel. That to me struck me as something that, and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole because I just want to stick to the facts here. So as a matter of fact, I'm just going to stop myself.
Hey, Scott, can you talk about the conversation you had with Clay Jensen real quick?
Yeah. Hey, Shawn. It's kind of similar to, I believe, what Kyle was saying, but, I was not dialed into the manifesto or any of the stuff that you were working. I simply received um, some fairly urgent outreach, one from the actual operative himself, uh, with, and who was talking about this possibly coming up, and it was news to me. So I immediately just gave you a heads up of, having talked to this individual and, just whatever you're working, just so there's potentially something that, might compromise him. I just want you to hear, what he said. And so that was the first one. And then Clay contacted me later that evening, um, separately, right, and just said that, as you had said earlier, he had similar, he knew this individual, he had concerns that if this dropped and his name was in it, that it could compromise what he's doing in the course of his work. And so both of those, I actually received it from two individuals, one the individual himself, and then let you know just as soon as I could, kind of in the blind, and then you took the actions to redact.
I just want to say again too that that brought a lot of the fact that so many people got contacted by CID or friends of the operative. I mean, brought a lot of legitimacy to the story. And then when we lined up, the 2019 incident, what it was, what was in the UN report, that it was airstrikes on drug, what narcotic type buildings. When I pulled up the individual's profile on LinkedIn, sure as shit, there it was that he was in some kind of anti-narcotics unit. So, Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to point out as well that from my own personal knowledge, I know he was, number one, not in Numerous Province, which doesn't necessarily negate the fact that he claims that he developed, what was it, over 120 target packages over there. But in one statement, he ends up saying, and this is where I think a lot of people are having issues with that email. In one statement, he's talking about US 4A, saying that US forces Afghanistan only ended up executing about 50% of those targets that he ended up developing. And in the very next breath, he ends up coming out and saying that US 4A is trying to cover up a bunch of CivCas or civilian casualties that ended up taking place. So they're two contradictory statements, both within the same breath, if you were to read it straight through. One, where US-4A is executing these targets in which he developed, but also that US-4A only executed about 50% of the targets due to civilian casualty concerns. And then in the following statement, it ends up coming out that he's talking about scrambling all aircraft across CENTCOM in just a couple minutes, which is absolutely absurd for anybody that's ever been over there and knows just how vast CENTCOM is and how long it takes to actually bring aircraft into that theater. So I think those are a lot of the issues that end up being arisen from that particular statement within itself. I'm very curious to hear your gentlemen thoughts on that.
I think you bring up a lot of good points there.
Right. I mean, if we're going to be complaining about civilian casualties from US-4A, which most people over inside of Afghanistan, if they've fought inside of Afghanistan, they know for a fact that the rules of engagement were restricted to the point where a lot of service members were actually complaining that it was putting their lives at risk in order to save civilian lives, and that was a major complaint throughout the entire war inside of Afghanistan, Iraq, or the global war on terror, regardless of what theater you were in. But to say that there was over 120 targets that he had packaged and about half of them were actually executed and then claim, a massive CivCAS and cover up, to me, that information doesn't jive, as a former teammate, as a Green Beret, and everything that goes in, not to mention him talking about US-4A and not SOTFA or Special Operations Task Force Afghanistan connected to the cover up. It's really odd to me. I had a situation, and I'm not going to give a particular year that this ended up occurring, but it did end up making international news, where I was very well aware of an entire ODA that ended up getting wiped out with personal close friends on it. And what ended up happening, and just to give an idea for everybody here that is listening, how many ever thousands are in here listening right now, this gentleman's entire ODA ends up getting wiped out, for lack of better terms. Multiple wounded, multiple killed, everything happens. International news hits, and they're talking about thousands, not thousands, dozens of civilians that ended up getting killed in the crossfire, and saying that this particular special forces team ended up killing all these civilians. And I will tell you, as the senior person on the ground was laying in a hospital bed that just had a tube ripped out of his throat, Special Operations Task Force Afghanistan had sent down an investigation officer to determine whether or not the claims that the Taliban had made on international news that mainstream media outlets such as CNN had published were already in there trying to dig at the truth, while this guy is hyped up on freaking opioids and all sorts of other stuff because of the multiple gunshot wounds that he has to his body. And so to pretend like civilian casualties are not taken seriously, not just within SOCOM, but also within like U.S. Forces Afghanistan, I think is kind of telling of possibly who the author of that letter is. And it definitely doesn't lead towards being a Green Beret, at least in my opinion.
Well, I can definitely agree with a lot of what you said, but the thing is that the emails did come in before January 1st, and they did say that
Right.
this had to go out before January 1st, and now we all know what happened on January 1st. And
Right.
so, I think the guy was definitely struggling with something that happened in 19.
Right. And, that would be true, except for the fact that I have also spoken with the person that leaked out the information about the Signal chat safety number, as well as the name on Signal being changed after the fact, after the detonation took place over inside of Las Vegas.
Yeah, I want to talk about that too, Matt. Keep going, but I want to reference that.
Yeah. If Shawn, do you want me to go deep into this, or do you want me just to brush over it? Because there's more about this that I haven't brought up to the public. I talked about it a little bit in my space last night, but I didn't fully disclose it yet.
No, I'd love to hear it.
Okay. So there is obviously, the information that ended up getting put out on 4chan Twitter about his Signal safety number and also his name being changed over inside Signal, one which took place on the 29th of December and another one that took place following the detonation itself. What is really concerning to me about this entire situation is somebody that has the ability to change a Signal safety number following the detonation, where we know Matt Livelsberger is dead. When we start talking about the ability to send out emails and everything else, which is why I said I'm very thankful for guys like you and Shu putting this information out ahead of time to make sure it's on public record that is undeniable. When we start presenting information like this, it's almost undeniable in that extent that how did his Signal safety number get changed? Signal is supposed to be one of those, secure messaging apps that has yet to be hacked, at least what's known to the public. But there is additional information that hasn't been released to the public yet, and we're holding it very, very tight because a lot of the people that ended up disclosing this are still on active duty. And Matt had just back in November, when I say Matt, I'm talking about Matt Livelsberger, back in November of 24, had just moved into this new drone position, had just completed some of his initial training into it. He was also in a group chat over on Signal that commonly discussed drones and, things with drones. And a lot of the messages that he had ended up posting inside of that Signal chat, which has dozens of members inside of it, ended up getting deleted. And those messages would suggest that he was not at all competent when it comes to drone operations or robotics. If anything, they pointed to the fact that he was a novice in it. Some of the things that are still on record that are in that particular chat are showing that he had a very basic understanding of it. And when he had posted them, he was excited, like, hey, everybody check this out. While everybody was also like, yeah, that's great, Matt. We're already well aware of that. Like, welcome to the freaking club, pal. And so there is some very serious issues. So we're not saying that these emails were not sent to Shawn. We're not saying these emails were not sent to Shu. We're not saying that they're not sent to Anti-Hero Podcast, but we're saying these things need a much deeper look taken before judgment is drawn.
Yeah, and to echo that plus rehash what I talked about in the podcast, people have asked me my opinion whether this email came from Matt Livelsberger. And I have said yes. And the reason why is, at least from his phone, at least from his device, the device had access to this. Maybe not from him physically, but from his device. The reason why is because when I saw those Signal chats leaked on the internet, I went into my Signal chat and I showed this on the Shawn Ryan podcast, and I had the same exact matching safety number change on mine. And that took place on the attack happened on Wednesday. It took place on Thursday. I screenshot that on Thursday, and it shows, safety number, or this happened. He made contact with me on such and such date, and then there was a blank, and then it showed safety number change. And I said, that's the same freaking thing these had. And people said, well, how do you know that Signal chat is from Matt? And I said, because it matches people who knew him. People who knew him prior to this incident knew that they were talking to Matt. They were speaking to Matt. So either Matt sent that Signal message, therefore confirming that he sent that email as well, or somebody had his device prior to that first initial contact on
Right.
Sunday.
And that's something that I'm going to back you up on this, right? Like, I have well vetted that source and know for a fact who that individual is, and that they had, distinct and intimate information that leads to that. And so for people to say that that did not occur, or that that is false information, is bullshit. I don't know how else to state that. People might start painting us as conspiracy theorists, but at the end of the day, it's a fact that that happened, and it's a fact that that occurred. In the deeper known fact that people do not know yet, which I have held on to very, very closely, and this information has been sent out just in case something happens to myself, family members, anything else, and they've got an ability to get that information out to where it needs to go in the event of that case, that what I had just talked about is already well documented and well distributed. So if anybody wants to play FAFO games, we have that information that's already been passed out, that already is, we'll just call it protected. And if that information for some reason becomes compromised, my life, my family's life, everybody else's lives become compromised. And I'm saying that for a reason, because something happened to my wife last month that's connected with this case, that that information will get out. So fuck around and find out.
Hey, I want to bring up something else that I think should be talked about sometime during this podcast that I'm not comfortable with. And maybe somebody could immediately answer this question, but I haven't seen it. So they said that they found an iPhone, and no other phone was recovered, at least that was not reported by the FBI. He might have had multiple phones, which is very, very plausible. However, he was contacting me from that Proton email account and from that Signal chat. You can't jump Signal chats to different phones. The Proton email on that fourth slide that I distributed, and I still have it in my email, has the signature line sent from an Android, sent from the Android Proton Mail app. That is an issue I have, because that was clearly sent, unless somebody went in there purposely for a ruse, changed it to say Android just to throw it off, or for some reason, I can't even imagine why. They said that they recovered an iPhone, but that email was sent from an Android. That still hasn't been answered to me, so I don't know.
So when it comes to the phone thing, it's worth noting that the Bureau has the ability to act like so many other intel type agencies do, but certainly a lot of law enforcement, the ability to jump in there and access a phone of somebody who's deceased. That's not crazy, especially if they had other devices that they were going on. And you can imagine the minute that they had an ID, especially if they found a physical ID like we're being shown. You know, I have all the same questions you guys do about things that survive fires, but fires are weird, explosions are weird, and things that survive it are also pretty strange if you have friends in the fire world. The fact that they would, or the idea that they wouldn't send somebody either in a what's called CART or a CAS team member out there immediately to start exploiting devices to try to figure out, because once something happens like that, you don't know if that's the only thing that's happening, if there's something else in play, if somebody's a victim, if they're a perpetrator, like all the questions happen as an investigator, especially stateside. So someone jumping onto a laptop and being able to access that, somebody accessing another phone that also has the profile. And Sam, I've got Signal, the same Signal account on multiple phones. You can have a couple devices. I can't remember how many, but I have buddies who are goofy and spooky, or they just like changing technology, and you'll get them updating, with the same phone number but different phones that they're cycling through. It'll update the safety number. So there are potentially some very um, exciting reasons why that could be the case. That could be related to the investigation. And obviously, it could also be that somebody had either cracked, hacked, or stolen the device and was operating with it. I think the thing that I was most interested in watching a lot of the online chat, because I watched this, and thankfully, Sam, it sounded like you were tuned out, so good for you. But there were a lot of people asking about the credibility of what it was that you did. Would it be fair to say that on this panel, including Matt, and Matt, it sounded like you had some questions early on, you're fairly confident that Sam received an email and then brought it forward in good faith. Shawn, same story, and everybody would basically exposed it. And then who wrote the email and whether it's true or not, those all can be debated. But we're not talking about the sort of the integrity or the veracity of the folks that brought it forward in good faith. Would that be fair for everybody?
Yeah, Kyle, that's fair. I mean, I don't think the integrity of Shawn can be called into question at this point, or Shu, when it comes down to, hey, this email was sent and received by both of these individuals, along with multiple others, and those statements are corroborating, and they're prior to. And Shu made a very valid point earlier on when he said, look, I would have had to have forecasted this. I have to have, like, his tarot card game has got to be on flipping point in order to have that email sent ahead of time, knowing that this stuff was coming down the pipeline. Right. So it's just inconceivable to myself or anybody else that would be the case. And, there's some other things too. If we're sitting here saying that maybe it was or maybe it wasn't Matt that ended up sending that email, but let's assume for the second that it was Matt and he was going to end up pulling this off. There was 2 references to the email that Shawn and Shu ended up sharing on that podcast. And those 2 references referred to Mexico and his ability to go down and get into Mexico. And of course, what was on his person or within the vehicle when it detonated was a passport. And there's a lot of people that are questioning the military ID and passport for having minimal damage or burn damage that got done to them. And I think it's important, if you want to talk about it, you're more than welcome to, or I can talk about it from a former, law enforcement or 18 Charlie perspective of how things like that could actually survive a blast. It's not inconceivable. It's up to you, Kyle. I don't know if you want to take it or if you want me to take it, but I know that's one of the other things out there that people are losing their minds about.
I put it as a data point where you can ask the question, but it's not definitive. Like people's bodies block glass, fire skips over stuff. I've seen pans melted, but paper survived in the same damn cabinet. It doesn't make any sense.
Right.
There's a lot of logic when you start applying high heat, pressure, explosive forces into things. You just things survive that shouldn't. It's just all about how the actual physics played out at that moment in a specific space that you can't recreate most of the time.
Right. And
that's been the way I've seen it.
yeah, and to give somebody just a general understanding or idea that's sitting in here listening to this space right now, if he had his military ID and or passport in his back pocket sitting in his butt cheek up against the seat, and that military identification card was sitting inside of a leather wallet, obviously it's going to have a hell of a lot less damage than something that was sitting on, for say, the passenger seat. And so understanding the difference between those things and where they actually collected the evidence from will give you an understanding for why certain things survived.
The last thing I wanted to throw out there too is that if Sam had not brought this to the Bureau right away, proactively before going on Shawn's, I think the order of operations here, one, it was crucial. It's worth noting it, and that's kind of what I wanted to add to it. But as far as timeline, but also it was a really big CYA, because if you had gone out there, Sam, and let's say shared this on Shawn's podcast for clout, which I don't believe you did because you told me you didn't want to do it, and you actually sounded really concerned about how this was going to affect you.
I was
And I know
terrified,
the kind of
man.
anxiety.
I'm an introvert, and people think that I did this for clout or something. Like, dude, I do not want this kind of notoriety. Absolutely
And
not. Please leave me alone.
And you said the exact same thing to me the first time we talked, and there's no reason to, I had no reason to doubt it. I was like, yep, I know how exactly that feeling of anxiety that like, this is going to suck and I have to do it because it's the right thing. If he had not shared that with the feds up front, if he had not put that in law enforcement's hand, you can expect one of two things would have happened. I guess three things. There could have been a voluntary knock and talk asking for access to his computer. There could have been a search warrant served to go get that information and taken out of his devices, or they could have done a subpoena and they could have gotten records, online or otherwise. And we can't rule out that they would do that anyway. They still might do that sort of thing. So for whatever that's worth, you might find that out. But at least you headed it off at the pass and said, I am proactively volunteering this information before talking about it. And by the way, it's going to be public. Again, the pressure that puts on a bureau that doesn't, you've seen what they do in public affairs. You saw what they did in New Orleans, where a girl's up there talking, and I don't know what else to call her because she's younger than me. She says, pacifically, we don't want you to walk on this street. Like, these people are getting out in front of the cameras foolishly. You know that they don't know how to handle a little bit of pressure. And so you guys did the right thing. You apply pressure. So the public is at least going to have a shot at learning something that's going on in this investigation, that there's going to be a little bit of a positive push.
Well,
Yeah,
and the
Kyle,
mindset. No, go ahead.
let me back you up for a sec, man, because you've been catching a lot of shit lately when it goes to media. I don't know your background. I don't follow you. I don't know a damn thing about you other than when I saw you on Shawn Ryan. And you may very well have some discrepancies in your past that I'm not aware of. And that's all fine and dandy. But at the end of the day, you actually said something that I also feel on my scale, which is I almost feel like I have been thrust into this because of the events over the last month that have taken place in connections with Livelsberger. That this is not a position that I want to be in, but I also feel duty bound almost to report and talk about this. It's got the potential to ruin your entire, your entire, how do you want to say it? Your entire reputation. And that is something that, as far as myself and inside of the community is concerned, is invaluable. You cannot put a dollar amount on my reputation inside of the community. I give a damn how much money you fucking pay me, what you tell me, or what you promise me. My reputation means the world to me, and I will do my best to protect it. So when I am putting information out like this and I'm talking about these things, you better damn well believe that both myself and the community are standing behind these statements, that this is not stuff that we willingly will thrust in the open to be in the spotlight because we think that it is going to somehow potentially help us. If anything, it scares the shit out of us, and it's not something that we want.
Yeah, exactly. There was never any ask for donations to anything. There was never, any kind of personal gain is like you said. Right now, I'm being scrutinized, and I said this on the Dale Stark podcast. You take a guy like, you take a big public figure who's been out there in the spotlight for the last couple of decades. People know if they like him or if they hate him already. And so when they do a story, they might shit on the story, but they're like, yeah, I like this guy or I don't like this guy. And they move on about their day. Right now, nobody knows who I am. So they're punching me into who they want me to be. And it sucks. And I knew this would be the case. And I told my wife at the time, and she actually told me not to do it. She said, just give it to the FBI and wash your hands of it. And I contemplated it. And the thing that drove me to do this was the same thing that drives me to have done the stuff I've been doing for the last 4.5 years. It's a pursuit of justice. And I'm not trying to sound like I'm not trying to sound like a white knight here, but it is the pursuit of justice, pure and simple. How many times have we seen the FBI withhold manifestos or any other kind of document from the public? And we're like, damn it, tell us what the freak is going on. Why did this person do this mass attack? Why did this happen? And the FBI won't tell us anything. And the last time I saw something was Steven Crowder. He got that manifesto from a whistleblower, and man, they just about burned the world down to find out who that whistleblower was. But I was like, that belongs to the public. The public is owed that manifesto. It is ours. We need to know what is going on in our country, in our schools, on our streets, because we are a people of the Republic, by the Republic. We own this country, and these people act like we don't. And I'm like, I have to take this to the public. I know I'm going to get excoriated for this, which is what's going on right now. But the people are owed this regardless. So let me calm down a little bit here, but that was the mindset behind all of this.
Yeah, and I think that's just the general sentiment across the U.S. population right now, especially when we look at videos from the Las Vegas hotel, right? Why are we only seeing tiny segments? Why are we not seeing the videos of him driving up to the scene? Why are we not seeing all of those things from these different points of view that would either confirm or deny whether or not his, let's say, hands were bound? That would kill a hell of a lot of conspiracy theorists right off the get-go. And I understand the intimacy that it comes with the family and making sure that we're not showing him, taking his head off, for lack of better terms, in front of the public. I wouldn't want to see that disclosed, on a public platform, but I almost feel like that's what it would take to calm a lot of this down.
Hey guys, I want to jump over to Dale Stark. Dale just interviewed him I think it was about 24 hours ago. And Dale, I was just wondering if you got any inconsistencies that you want to share, or if you learned anything new.
Yeah, no, really the reason I wanted to talk to Shu after you interviewed him and this all came out was that there was a lot of narratives kind of taken off that really diverged from what you guys had said in the interview, which for the most part you guys have already addressed. So, nobody validated the legitimacy of the message or who sent it. And I thought that was all very clear. And I, again, just wanted to give a platform to Shu to expand on that a little bit more.
Hey, Dale, while you're on here, we've gotten some questions. One is regarding the vehicle that Matt spoke about in the email to Sam. Can you talk about how you said that you've received information from others about his ISO prep? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so I spoke with a current active duty, highly decorated sergeant major in Special Forces, and he told me that the bona fides in the email matched his ISO prep. So I don't have obviously any information of that myself, but that was told to me right before I talked to Shu. So I was actually wanted to open that up to the group and ask anyone else because there, a lot of people were talking about that, and there were some inconsistencies on his registration record. If that was maybe indication that he didn't send the email, or if it was accurate. And I'll just leave it open if anyone wants to answer that.
Yeah, I'd like to, I don't know how to say this. I'd like to jump up for a sec because I think it's important to the storyline, and it's something that is a little known fact that a lot of people need to be aware of. So Matt has connections to Ukraine, as do I. I was one of the first SF guys to go over to Ukraine back in 2015, laid the groundwork for everything that's to be seen currently to this day. Matt ended up following suit over behind us. Now, last month, because of the podcast that I run over on YouTube, I had made an announcement that I was going to end up going over into Kursk, Russia, by invitation of the Ukrainian military to document the dead DPRK soldiers that were over inside of Russia. And within a day of me making that announcement, I ended up getting contacted by somebody that is pretending to be an active duty SF member, and we're going to leave the details out of it. But they had intimate personal identification information of Green Berets, not only on where the team that Matt was currently serving on at that time, but also in addition to that, had also taken over Matt's position. And if we fast forward just 1 to 2 days, my wife ends up falling dangerously ill with a neurological condition that we can't explain. The neurologist can explain MRI, CT scan, cerebral spinal fluid, blood draw, everything else ends up coming clear and doesn't explain why this ends up taking place. And all of this occurs immediately following my announcement that I'm going to end up going over into Kursk, Russia. So not only do I get contacted by somebody that has intimate details about this ODA down to personal identifying information, but now my wife followed, very, very ill and ends up having to get hospitalized for about a week, to which she still to this day is having issues. Now, within 24 hours of her getting out of the hospital, I get contacted again via a different, it was a text messaging app this time, which I got contacted on, again, disclosing other personal identifiable information about current active duty Green Berets, who are holding similar positions and have also ties to myself and Matt L. All of that takes place, and now we have this coming out. And so to me, when I start judging and I start looking at what's taking place right now, there is somebody out there that has information about active duty Green Berets, whether or not we want to talk about it or not openly, publicly on this forum. And we have, Matt Livelsberger over here that has now committed this act that most people that know him, as a matter of fact, every single individual that I've spoken to that knows him, there's not a snowball's chance in hell that he would have flown off the rails to this extent. With that being said, there's something else I want to address. There's a lot of people talking about like mental health issues with him and saying that, okay, well, maybe he had PTSD, maybe he had a traumatic brain injury, maybe he had these other things that caused him to fly off the rails. And it's something that I've spoke about publicly when I talk about PTSD or anything otherwise. My last deployment to Afghanistan, I was on 300 milligrams of Zoloft, and that was sanctioned by the military. Now, for those of you who don't know, max dose of Zoloft comes in right around 200 milligrams. And I was like 150%, beyond that. So for them to sit there and say that, PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, any of this is a huge cause that goes into it. No. When I look at this, I can't explain, the things that have happened when it comes to disclosing personal identifiable information. But my question is, if somebody has the ability to disclose PII like that on, different Green Berets that are currently active, while at the same time, those GBs, including myself, have connections to Matt, and then we have this happening. And in addition to that, we have a bunch of stuff in the emails that are allegedly tied back to Matt. I'm not even saying that they don't. I would bet you that the frickin', server sent from, address, everything matches up perfectly. If somebody is capable of gathering that type of information and putting that type of information out, what the hell are we dealing with here? That would be my question.
Hey guys, I'm
And
gonna
it left people speechless.
yeah, it did. I'm gonna remove a couple of speakers here and bring some more on real quick. And as we start to kind of transition out of this, I want to move into some of the terrorism threats that we were talking about the other night. Bring Sarah on, Scott, man, Guido might still be in the chat somewhere, and there's a couple other people that want to speak. So right now, I'm going to open it up to trying to get the anti-hero guys in here to talk about the email they received. And if is Tim Burchett in here? Jeremy, could you find him?
Yeah, I don't see him in here, and I'm trying to find Guido, and I'm glitching pretty hard over here.
Okay. Well, in the meantime, I did want to, while we're waiting for them, I did want to ask. There was some talk about. Sure, you talked about some Iranian man pads coming across the border. I just wanted to see if Sarah Adams had heard anything about that, or Scott Mann as well. They're pretty tied in with this stuff.
I can go first. So I heard about the man pads from what I think might have been the other person Shu talked about. So another person involved in human trafficking. I reached out to them because they were looking for me. I found out they were looking for me because they wanted me to go and brief the issue with them in Congress. I obviously declined it because I don't brief information not collected from my own sources and I can't vet. I talked in some circles with them. Their sourcing actually came from an American in one of our federal agencies, which again isn't the type of sourcing I go off of. So that's kind of where I went with that, and I just kind of left it. I know from what Shu said, and then some of the follow-on ops, it ended up becoming something more. But when I first looked into it, it didn't really align with what I was working on. As a lot of people know, I'm working on actually the suicide vest, and there was a question to me from Congress: were the man pads and the vests the same thing? And I was really answering that question, saying no, they are two separate threats. But I never said the man pads weren't a threat. I just said you need to view them as two separate threats. They aren't together. So I hope that helps. I didn't do much more on the man pad piece. Thank you.
And I will say that the way Sarah just described where one of those sources came from is exactly how I would describe it. So probably the same thing.
Yeah, and on my end, Sean, nothing from the the network that I talk to on ManPad specifically to this point. I mean, I've got some feelers out after the interview you've done asking the question specifically, but nothing back yet.
Roger that. Thank you.
And the
Uh,
anti-hero pod DM is in the nest if anyone wants to look at.
getting Guido in here. I don't know if you want to speak on that, Guido. If not, Shu, how do you feel about taking a couple of questions?
I'll answer anything anybody's got.
All right, Guido, hang tight for just a second. I'm gonna get this guy Ian Carroll on. He did a couple of pieces on this. Let's see what he's got. Ian Carroll, go ahead.
What's up, guys? Thanks for bringing me up. I just have one quick question that you guys kind of touched on just a second ago, but I wanted to kind of get some clarification, like kind of more plain English. And it's about the email sort of like self-identifier of his first car. And the internet sleuthed through his records, and it seemed to be not the right year for the right make and model of his car. You guys have a ton of experience in this world. Does that mean anything to you guys in the special forces world that he misidentified the year of his first car, or is that just kind of like noise?
I think Kyle can take this one. He'll explain what the ISO prep is and how that the car.
I was going to say one of you other guys should do it. Look, if you ever gone through a SEER training, if you have a flight crew background, they have a thing that's called isolated personnel report. So the whole idea is that there's a questionnaire that you fill out so that if you are isolated from friendly forces and you have rescue teams come in various different formats, they're going to basically treat you as hostile until they can verify your personality or who you are. So they're going to go through these questions. And the weird thing is that it's whatever you answered. So maybe Matt maybe Shawn can say the same thing. I know some people that never give real information on that because it's not something they want looked up. They actually give deliberately false information on a regular basis. If you were to go to find out what my birthday is, you'll find I give the same fake birthday like pretty much everywhere because I just don't like using my real birthday. And I don't know why it is. Maybe it's because I watched a Robert Redford movie one time. So some dudes will literally just give you legit fake information that they will remember that nobody else can validate except them. And that is equally useful for verifying as long as it matches what's on that ISO prep document. And then when the friendly forces come to link up with them. You guys may have different experience with that, so I'd be totally happy to hear it. But I know guys do that. I've got friends who are Green Berets. My last partner was as well. It's not uncommon for people to kind of have like their own little weird quirks when it comes to like how I'm going to keep my information safe and secret that nobody can fake. By the way, Matt, when you were talking about the hacking capability and being able to access that info, we're talking about nation state capabilities. We're not talking about,
Correct.
generally speaking, like individuals. It's just worth kind of tossing that into the fire too.
Yeah, I'm 100% pointing to that, or at least alluding to it, that you're talking about essentially a foreign intelligence service that would be capable of doing that.
Great explanation, Kyle. Thanks. That's not the kind of thing that anyone in your guys' positions could access his sort of like expected ISO prep answers, is it? That's like that's proprietary, and we wouldn't know if he gave the answer that he's supposed to give or not.
Correct.
Well, Dale did confirm with somebody who is able to access it, but no, we can't. That stuff is not, we're not going to publish
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. Great. Thanks for the answer, man. Appreciate it. I'll drop back down.
All right, Jeremy, anything with Tim Burchett or Antihero?
Don't have either of those guys, but Guido's on.
All right, before we move to Guido, is there any questions in the chat?
One question is, do you think that the email that was sent to Sam is the same as the letters that were allegedly found on the phone?
I can't answer that. I have no idea.
Yeah, pure speculation. Who knows?
It sounds like, and Kyle did mention that the FBI does have the ability to access certain devices and stuff. So, you know, I'm not sure.
For whatever it's worth, because
Right
just
on.
because you're talking about speculation, they don't look like the same writer at all. They would look like somebody who had a completely different personality, or maybe somebody who, like, the sentence structure is different, the lexicon, the type of words being used, the formation of thoughts and ideas, the length, the topics, completely different. They don't, do people change that dramatically? Not usually. For whatever it's worth, when you start looking into people's writing samples, there's a reason why you can go back and look at them and go, okay, fine, this likely came from this side or not the other. When you look at them, they don't look like they came from the same person. Now, I didn't know Matt at all, and maybe somebody who knew him could say, oh yeah, that's the way that he talked if you got him offline. He went off on political rants, but that's kind of not what you see a lot of guys that are in the, there's not very many people in the military that talk like that, let alone people who are special operators. It's just not, it looked like bad AI generated, like, right-wing talking points, if I was going to speculate on it. So it would be reasonable to assume that it probably came from different sources. Now, what that source was, who freaking knows? Looks like you got anti-hero.
All right, Brent Tucker from Antihero, former Delta guy. Go ahead. You coming on?
Must have been a prior Bravo.
He has the microphone, so he can go. That should work.
I'm laughing at that, Matt. That was funny.
Yeah, I mean, not a lot of people would understand that joke, but I'm glad somebody did. His microphone's probably in about 1,000 different pieces right now.
How about now? We'll try that. Can you guys hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay. And I did hear the 18 Bravo joke. It's hilarious that I actually was an 18 Echo.
Damn it.
A few things that I definitely want to cover. There were 2 phones recovered. Of course, this is open source, and anyone who ever wants a conspiracy theory, this means you'd have to believe what the Las Vegas police department put out. But 2 phones were recovered. Also, when it comes to the evidence and obviously proving who was in that truck, they reported that the DNA evidence did match, as well as tattoos that matched him. And they showed pictures of the tattoos that matched and his dental records. So if you don't believe 1 or 2, they actually have 3 identifying ways to show that was, in fact, Matt in the truck. But I really wanted to go down his manifesto, kind of down the list. He talked a lot about China, and I just wanted to point out, I think it's just worth pointing out, he was a 10th group Green Beret. And it doesn't mean that he doesn't know anything that's going on in the world, but to be so deeply embedded in what China is doing as a 10th group Green Beret, his area of operation is Europe, and that's where his focus should be. He talks about gravitic propulsion. If you do any research into gravitic propulsion, it actually spawns from nuclear fusion, and China doesn't even have nuclear fusion online yet, although they're way ahead of us on that. He talks about dozens of balloons being over the U.S. at any given moment. I've had to call my sources on that, and they said that's absolutely not true. He talks about being followed for over a week by FBI and HSI, and I'll tell you, when you think people are starting to follow you, I'm not saying it'll never happen, but man, those resources are finite. You really have to get high on someone's radar before they start sending things after you. And he hasn't done anything public yet. So anytime you believe someone is following you, it really kind of starts to sound like a case of PPD, or paranoid personality disorder, and that comes about. There's something to be said about TBIs, PTSD, mental health. I'm not going to put it out here. Shawn, I might call you after this, but he was in a. There were things going on in his marriage, and I can tell you what they were right from the higher ups in 10th group. But that's his personal information, and I'm not going to put that out there. But you put all those together, and you're going to have some really bad mental days, which is what I think he had. He lists the war crimes. You guys talked about that, so I'll skip over that. But he talks about hundreds of civilians in a single day. When it comes to these drone strikes are really surgical strikes. They don't kill hundreds and hundreds of people in a single day. And by 2019, most people know that this was really an Afghan war in 2019. So anyone on the ground actually going into compounds, doing things, really would have been on the Afghans and not the Green Berets on the ground in 2019. You guys already talked about the 6 minutes to scramble aircraft. It just sounds like, if you didn't know. And to go over the gravitic propulsion system, we had a guy on, Kurt, who was a Green Beret and part of the UAP task force in episode 102, and he knows nothing about that. And that was his job, was on a UAP task force. So really, what I want to say is, anytime you have someone, even if they're having mental issues, which is an opinion of mine, I'm not out here to drag anyone's name through the mud, but I'm just kind of investigating this, putting the pieces together. There's always going to be some truth to it, and if you weren't in the military or understand everything he just says, like, yes, that sounds like a guy who who knows his stuff. But when you go through the whole manifesto, it doesn't make sense, and it doesn't sound like a guy who has a clear head. So I just wanted to go down the manifesto, and I'm sure there'll be some arguments on all those points, as there should be. But I wanted to make sure we covered all those line by line.
Yeah, let me add something to that. Just my personal background. I was the J2T in Iraq in 2018, and what you said is something I talked to Dale with. I don't think during the podcast, but offline. But this idea of mass killing of people and everything else. I've seen some things I disagreed with in the strike cell, but I can assure you that there was always legal present, and there was always a way to legally back up what was done. And these alleged war crimes are so absurd from anybody who's spent any time in the targeting realm and in just kind of the military in general, if you've been downrange, that it's really hard to get behind anything that was written there. It's very outlandish.
Yeah. Like on my side, like personal story of mine, I ended up dropping 400 or 500 pounders on a site that's suspected to take out an entire ODA. And that was due to a defensive fighting position that was still standing at the time. And even after the 400 or 500 pound JDAMs ended up getting dropped on it, we still have 2 ISIS fighters who are alive and well that end up running out to put that fire out, which end up getting dispatched with small arms fire. The funny part is that SOTF ends up taking that information and blasting it out across all of SOTF for excessive use of force, as an example, even though the defensive fighting position was still standing. So for people to look at this and say that they don't understand why US 4A, for example, would be committing all of these civilian casualties, that is the issue that guys like myself, Antihero, Shu, everybody else, probably even Shawn up here, is having with this email, to where they're alleging a massive civilian casualties, a massive cover-up, while we know for a fact that the United States government is very, very stringent when it comes down to civilian casualties and making sure that that is not occurring on the battlefield.
Yeah, I'll
I
tell
think we've
you
pretty much
how.
wrapped up everything in this email for now. Unless you got something more, Brent. Go
How
ahead.
serious the government takes CivCas, they will shut down even the unit operations over CivCas. I've never seen CivCas taken lightly at any level of the military that I was in.
One of the questions that we've gotten has been, have any of the people who've worked with Matt reached out to either Shawn or you, Sam, with regarding the details of what was written in that email, or specifically just about how he was a good guy?
So I checked my social media within first day after I did the Shawn Ryan podcast before things had started really blowing up. And I had somebody who was very close to the family reach out with some information. And beyond that, I'll be honest with you, I haven't checked my social media in the last 24 hours because these assholes have been dragging me through the mud and I just don't care to read all the garbage out there. So I couldn't tell you. There's probably a lot of stuff in there, but
I will tell you that.
Yeah, I mean, like we had mentioned, we talked to the public affairs officer for the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the Army, and they wanted to make sure that we understood that he was an upstanding soldier, a great leader, that he was moving on into retirement, and was going to improve the future of warfare, is what they said. But they were pretty adamant that they wanted us to know that.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what, Shawn, like not only did I serve with the guy, but also have had several other people reach out to me that currently have. Nobody trusts the freaking media. Nobody trusts any three-letter agency at this point in time. So we all just kind of like lean on ourselves and the people that we know. Everything that we know about him is, number one, he was very family oriented, loved his family to death, loved his wife, loved his brand new child. Two, while he may have been a supporter of Trump, he was not ultra MAGA in any way, shape, or form. And these are all things that have been asked to convey that he was not ultra MAGA in any way, shape, or form. He was just a regular person that kind of believed a little bit in what he, saw going forward with the future president. And that he was also very mission dedicated, that he spent a lot of his time, even more time than he should have, to make sure that the mission succeeded, whatever mission that may have been, which is why we talked about his signal chat and the message that he sent, and just being excited to learn a new craft. And I'm going to take anti-hero stance on this and not get into his family dynamics, but he respected his family to the point where he was moving on to new positions that would allow him more time with his family, because he respected his wife and his family to that extent.
I have to say this, and the two people that I did talk to, and one even went to the Fox course with him and said he was the smartest guy in the Fox course. You can, yes, you can have great past performance, but when it doesn't guarantee you, a life without issues, and it can come on fast and it can come on quick. And I just don't, again, I know this is, opinion based, but if indeed it ended up being, he some sort of a mental breakdown, just because he was a good guy at one point, of his career and very mentally sharp, doesn't mean that gets to stay with you. And I hate to be, the pessimist about that, but I just want to bring in the reality of that.
No, I think the saying is 1-0 shit ruins 100 attaboys.
Well, everybody, I appreciate you being here. I think we pretty much covered everything I wanted to cover with the emails, with the podcast, with the information that's going around. I think we probably cleared up a lot of the questions for anybody that's listening, and hopefully this information gets disseminated out. And once again, we talked to Kyle. We got the emails to the FBI. I think everybody on here is on the same page that we did the right thing by releasing this. Otherwise, it never would have been released. We brought up several examples where the FBI's held it out, and so if it happens again, I would do it all over again. I think we did the right thing. So I did want to spend maybe the last 20, 30 minutes going over some of the turn it over to Sarah and Scott. Right before this happened, there was a big discussion about some of the stuff that Sarah and Scott and Legend and Masood had kind of brought up on the show as to what we can expect here in 2025 and how we're funding the Taliban and what's coming across the southern border, who's being recruited within our borders, and what we can do. So I'll turn it over to Sarah Scott in Guido right now.
We'll have Guido go first because he wrote Al Qaeda 2.0 and he can set the stage, and then we can fill in anything after that.
Well, thank you for having me, first of all, Shawn, and thank you for giving the opportunity to talk about this subject. Getting back to the last part that we discussed, three Afghan generals were contacted to ask about the events in 2019, and they all three said that it simply didn't happen like that. So to give you a little bit more information on that matter. About the upcoming attack on the US and Europe, this actually started in 2006, 2009, when they found plans in attacking major cities in Europe and the US. And it evolved in getting the sons of bin Laden planning to revenge the death of their father. And with returning Afghanistan back to the Taliban and Al Qaeda, it gave them an opportunity to actually implement this plan. And it's a broad plan with a lot of things that people simply don't realize the sophistication of it, the amount of tradecraft and the things that they learned. And Al Qaeda adopted very quickly and really shaped a new kind of battlefield for themselves. And I think we saw with the October 7th attack the first part of this. And that's mainly that they can do a lot of damage and a lot of terror with very few means and little funding, for example. When you look at the plot itself, it consists out of larger groups of terrorists being split up in cells and being active in different cities and doing simultaneous attacks like October 7th, or as we name it in the book, like what happened in Mumbai. They simply discovered that when you have 10 guys attacking 10 different locations in one city, then you can overwhelm the local law enforcement. And when you do this on a national level and you attack in 10 different cities, you saw what happened a few days ago when we had two events on one day in the country. It's really starting to blow up in media and in discussions. If this is happening in 10 cities, and not only in the US, but in the US and Europe at the same time, then you will really have terror and disorder. And there are several reasons for them to do it in this year or maybe next year. According to Sarah, it's very fluid, so that they are easily, and they are able to postpone it or to do it earlier. But it's for revenge of the killing of Osama bin Laden and several other leaders. It's mainly revenge for the 20 year of global war on terror. And this is something that was connected to what happened a few days ago. Al Qaeda really made clear that they are going after all those soldiers who fought in Afghanistan and in Iraq. And when you look at this guy's track records and the amount of missions he had in Afghanistan, for example, if they had information coming from the biometrics that the Taliban still have, or from other documents, or simply from open source information, if he was on their radar, then that could have played a part in this whole thing. But this is something that Al Qaeda is very keen to do. They want to take revenge on a national level on the fact that the global war on terror killed a lot of people in those countries. They want revenge for killing their leadership. And they want revenge to those who fought this war on terror in their countries. So yeah, this is something that's been described in the book, and I think Sarah can tell you a lot more about this.
Yeah, and just some of the items I would add is, As Guido said, it's a huge kind of like plotting scheme. There's tons of waves. So obviously we can't go through all of them, but there's not just waves against the US, there's waves against Israel, and then there's obviously waves against Europe. And then there's what we call the caliphate wave, and that's just basically similar to kind of what we saw in Syria. It's kind of the blitzkrieg or whatever events that they're planning to take over other countries and make them Islamic caliphate. So some will be like we saw in Syria, be an actual blitzkrieg. Other countries, they're actually going to first attack the US embassy and potentially the Israeli embassy and try to push Americans out and then try to do a blitzkrieg. So they have different strategies per country. Now, when we come back to the US homeland attack, besides the kind of the idea of the Mumbai attack in cities, there's two other components to this that are important and that I'm focused on. It's one is they're going to use about 10% of the attackers are going to be suicide bombers. So I'm focusing a lot on that piece. And then they're also going to bring back some of the old airline plots and blow up airliners. And as some people know, I used to work in corporate security for an airline. So I've obviously taken the lead on working some of the airline piece because I'm very familiar with the industry and have a lot of connections there and like hope we can make some, security improvements to, thwart pieces of that part of the plot. So those are the pieces I'm working on. And then Scott, do you want to kind of talk about the piece you're going to do and we're helping you with to kind of bring in law enforcement in the community level?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it, and appreciate you and Guido laying it down. But the only thing I would just come in at from kind of an operational perspective is that a lot of folks are asking the question, which is, okay, so why are we not hearing this from the three-letter agencies? Why are we not hearing this from DoD? And this is something that really I think in 2025 is really important to get out there, not just for the incoming administration, but for people at state and local levels, because any prudent law enforcement, first responder, hell, overseer of a daycare, right, that is charged with the responsibility of local people, would want to know if there is even a remote chance of a brewing plot that's going to manifest at levels where we live, work, and play with highly trained, highly dedicated operatives that are willing to fight to the death. Like that's something we have not faced here, and it has precedent all over the world. And so it's something that I feel compelled that at our nonprofit Task Force Pineapple, we're really working hard to put out some state and local perspective. And this is something I've talked to Shawn about. We just did I announced a LinkedIn Live today after Shawn's drop the other day, and just what happened on January 1. There were over 300 people on a LinkedIn Live today. Talking about this. That's the level of just energy that there is around it. And so we're calling it the Gathering Storm. And it's going to be a supplement to Al Qaeda 2.0. We're going to self-publish it. We're going to push it out in just a week or two. But the whole focus is going to be, it's going to start with kind of, answering a couple of just like, why are we not hearing this from the agencies? Why are we hearing this from GWAT veterans? Then it's going to go into the threat picture that Guido and Sarah and others have put together. It's going to include a perspective from various resistance leaders, and I mean very, very well placed resistance leaders. Like these are the men that really have a point of view that's unparalleled on what not just the Taliban but Al Qaeda, ISIS-K are doing. And then finally, we're going to do something that builds on Al Qaeda 2.0 in a very, very serious way. Again, focusing on state and local levels, we're going to talk about what are the lessons learned from other locally distributed complex attacks, starting with, for example, the Chechens when they took over the Russian school. Remember that? And they planted those explosives, that horrific incident there. Mumbai, which Guido talks a lot about in Al Qaeda 2.0. That's probably one of the best templates we have right now, which was, part of this original plot. And it's distributed attacks where basically 10 terrorists for several days locked down a city of 19 million people with mass casualties, using assault rifles, grenades, and then pivoting into the Vegas shooting, pivoting into the DC sniper, pivoting into October 7. Hell, we're even going to look at Western North Carolina, where institutional leadership failed and GWAT veterans rolled into the fray to do hurricane relief. We're basically going to look at these events that were state and local in nature. And we kind of, different groups got their asses kicked. What can we learn from that? What kind of takeaways can we share with state and local leaders at formal and informal levels? Like, for example, we've been talking a lot tonight about special forces, but like on the positive side, 18 Foxtrot Special Forces intelligence sergeants are great at threat vulnerability assessments. How do we get asset visibility on these veterans who could go in and do, TVAs on daycare centers, on community centers, on vulnerable pieces of infrastructure within the civilian population, and partner with local law enforcement and sheriff's departments to do that? Sarah and I are even working with sheriffs in Florida right now to put together private-public partnerships that would include members of the GWAT community as part of the composition to stand up against some threat like this were it to manifest. And then the final thing I'm just going to say, I'm going to bring it back to what I started with, is people are asking, well, okay, again, why are we hearing this from GWAT veterans and not the three-letter agencies? And I think it's really important that everybody on this call understand that when we betrayed our allies in Afghanistan and we left there in the summer of 2021, the three-letter agencies walked away from 99% of their human intelligence capability. 99%, right? Of those highly trained, highly vetted sources, they left them in the dirt on the side of the road to be hunted and killed. We walked away from 100% of our partner force, 30,000 commandos and other special operators, if not more, were just left to their own devices, with the exception of a few that were evacuated, right? And you know who picked up the phone and who got involved were these volunteer groups, to include Sarah, Guido, and others that jumped into the fray and did everything they could, cashing in their pensions, their kids' college funds, paying for safe houses, for babies to be born through midwives, food drops. And over the last 3-4 years, what they've done is they've been able to leverage those highly placed individuals that would normally be on the books of three-letter agencies. They've been able to retask them, reorient them, and start to collect information that is high fidelity, highly vetted, tons of veracity. And the templates that Sarah's given you are coming from those sources that would be the highest caliber sources traditionally from these three-letter agencies. The difference is they bailed on them, right? So it's not classified information. It's stuff that's come in open source, but it is high quality. And I've seen it corroborated across multiple sources. While at the exact same time when that happened and we bailed on them, we legitimized the Taliban. The administration that's on the way out the door right now decided to deal directly with the Taliban, to give them upward of $87 million a week, and to even do intelligence sharing with the Taliban, and to develop reports. And Sarah can speak to this. Reports that are being shared across the IC right now that are coming from the Taliban about ISIS and Al Qaeda. And I'm not sure on what planet, any GWAT operator or intelligence operative worth their salt would look at that and go, that's a good idea, right? While you simultaneously have an open border to the south for multiple years. So that's where we're coming from on all of this. And our goal is that this Gathering Storm product, Shawn, will basically be oriented to state and local leaders, because I'm sure your phone, like mine, is blowing up with people like, okay, what do we do at an individual level, at a community level? What should we be thinking about? And that's what this book's really focused on, is just looking at precedent, looking at distributed attacks prior to now, not in a sky is falling kind of way, but just say, what can we learn? What are the lessons learned here that we can put together, share with state and local folks, and we'll do what we can to share with the incoming administration. I hope they listen. I'm not sure they will, honestly. I'm somewhat optimistic, and we're going to try. But you and I have had this conversation. I don't know, but we're not going to wait on that. We're going to share what we have with state and local leaders so that they can take whatever prudent actions they deem necessary. And frankly, I mean, I'm ready to get on with my life. This isn't what I do for a living. I left Special Forces 12 years ago. I know there's other people in this game that feel the same way. Yeah, that's where we're going with this thing. And in the next couple of weeks, I would tell people to be on the lookout for the Gathering Storm, because it'll be a really helpful supplement to AQ 2.0.
Scott, real quick before you go, I mean, what are the top three things that you guys are telling, local leaders that they can do to prepare, get ready for something like this. I mean, the one thing that I just continuously say is button up your kids' schools. You know, go to your school, start raising hell about the security there. Seems like just about every school I go to that I check on, not much security, if any, has been implemented at all. And you know, but people just aren't getting loud enough, I don't think. And with that being said, you know, anywhere you go, start looking at the security there and
Yeah,
start pressing to up it. That would be my advice, because just time and time again, I mean, we just talked about this with when you guys went down to New Orleans. I mean, people are asking for things and for training and stuff like that. It's not
yeah,
happening.
yeah. I
So
would just offer a couple of things to think about. And again, there's guys on this call that are way more qualified than me to address like individual stuff. So I'm gonna hit stuff maybe a little bit more um, just in a different direction. And I think this could work for anybody. First of all, I think it's really important that everybody look at the scenarios that are evolving, right? Is rather than just dismiss them out of hand and say, okay, well, that's not coming from the three-letter agencies, or that's not coming from the government. I mean, anybody who's ever dealt around, combat operations knows that competing intelligence points of view is not a bad thing. And so I would say pick up Al Qaeda 2.0, pick up October 7 that Sarah wrote, and read them. They're quick reads. Read them and really think about, because they have some really informative and helpful scenarios that lay out what the most probable and most dangerous courses of action are, what it's going to look like at a local level, and even some really good recommendations to think about in your community. And then after you read that, take a look at where you live, where you work, and where you play. Because at the end of the day, that is the idea of a mass casualty attack like this, is to hit us where we live, work, and play, and to create a level of systemic paralysis. So step back and look, where do you live? Where do you work? Where do you play? And how could these scenarios then inform that? Right. And think about, where are you most vulnerable? Where are you most exposed? Like you said, Shawn, like schools. And then I would also encourage people, community watch, community engagement. This is about community. It's a really important thing that you could have conversations around this. There's stuff going on in Florida right now where I know for a fact that sheriffs listen to your show, and other states are reaching out to us right now at Task Force Pineapple saying, hey, how do we create a private public partnership with Global War on Terror veterans and what you guys are looking at, and create sensible, responsible ways to, get in front of this thing as best we can. Look, that's available to any of us in any community. The law enforcement, the local officials, they work for us, right? And so, it's a hell of a lot easier, I think, to insist upon what's going on with those in terms of contingency plans and resources and funding as a citizen than it is the federal government. So I think it starts, Shawn, with digging into these two products. And then when Gathering Storm comes out, you got three. And take that and let that scenario based information help you make educated decisions about where you live, work, and play, right? Without overreacting. And then bring the community into it. Step up and lead in your community on it. If you're a GWAT veteran, for God's sakes, I mean, you fought in Fallujah, you fought in Ramadi, you know what this looks like. Offer up solutions on that and what that might look like. It really is, in my assessment, very much a bottom up application here, because that's where it's going to manifest. And Sarah and Guido may have some things to add.
real quick before we move on to that, to Sarah and Guido, I mean, how do we? You and Sarah are really like knocking this out of the park, but we need more of you guys. And so, how do we force multiply this so that we can get more states on board, get more educators, getting out there to local community leaders? I mean, what do you
Well,
guys need
I
to
tell
do
you, I
that?
think first of all, what I'm seeing, I'm really encouraged by. Well, there's two levels here. First of all, at the federal level, there's several guys and girls that you've had on your show that are now in principal positions in the federal government, right? And for example, Mike Waltz, I've reached out to him. I've reached out to Pete Hegseth. He's very interested in this, and I think there's a good chance that we'll have the opportunity to share 4 years of what GWAT veterans have been doing to collect this information. And frankly, we need to responsibly hand this off, a lot of this. We need institutional leaders. We need adults in the room, in the game here, picking some of this stuff back up, right? Like relationships with Masood, for example. Any Green Beret on here would be probably surprised to know that Ahmed Masood is not being engaged by anybody, right, within the federal government right now at a relationship level. That's a problem. Like, that's a serious problem if we think about what we would need to do to go back in there. So I would say I'm encouraging you and anybody on here that has outreach or influence with this incoming administration. I think we need to get really loud and we need to insist that a handful of folks, Guido, Sarah, myself, and a few others that have been working this problem set, we need an audience with this incoming administration staff, cabinet, particularly Intel, DOD, National Security Advisor, Homeland Security. They need to hear what the GWAT veterans have been working for the last 4 years and holding the line while the institution has failed. That's they need to hear this, and they need to hear it before they take office, right? Because once they take office, they're going to own it. And I think it's going to be much harder for them to separate themselves from it and really do what's right. But right now, if we could just even an hour get in front of these individuals and lay this shit out, man, because they need to see this. I mean, you still got three-letter agencies saying Hamza bin Laden's dead. And that's just inexcusable. Like, that's a level of dissonance between institutional leadership and this bottom up effort. We can't tolerate that. Like, that's going to get a lot of people killed. And if they can make the argument and disprove what we're saying, fine. But at least give these GWAT veterans who gave years and years of their life and then stood up again and held the line over the last few years, give them an audience. So that's one. I think, and if you could help with that and others on here, that we demand of this incoming administration, give us an audience and let us be heard. Let us lay this out for you. We can lay this shit out in 2 hours. And then you make a decision on what you're going to do. That's number one. And then number two, as far as like getting more people involved, I'm really encouraged. I tell you, I see the outreach that's happening right now. People are reaching out to tfpineapple.org from all kinds of, it's mostly red states, I'll be honest. But Homeland Security committees, sheriff departments are reaching out to Sarah and me saying, hey, how do we get you guys to come talk with us and do scenario-based training? Can Sarah take a look at our analysis section? So I think that's what's just got to continue. And it's not unique to Sarah, Guido, and me. There's a lot of folks out there who have tremendous insights on how we could harden our communities and still maintain our way of life, how individuals could do smart scenario-based training. And I think it's just doing what you're doing, Shawn, continuing to flatten the landscape. Let's keep talking about it. Let's keep laying it out, not in a panicked sky is falling kind of way. But man, I tell you, this GWAT generation of veterans, I'm so proud of them. I'm so proud of who they are and what they do, how they've stood up through all of this. And I think we really need to encourage them to continue to lead us from the bottom up, to continue to illuminate what's possible at a community level. And if you see something laying on the ground and it's stinking and it doesn't make sense, pick it up, because nobody else is coming. So pick it up and just take a lead on it, and then kind of dive into the network with the rest of us and just keep iterating on it, because this community's fast and thoughtful. And I think we just keep doing what we're doing, what you helped get started, what Sarah started, what she initiated, legend. We just keep iterating until we get loud enough that the federal government has to listen to us and do the right thing.
Perfect. Sarah, Guido, you guys got anything?
I just had one quick thing. Scott mentioned our October 7th report. That's an investigation to the plotting behind the Hamas attacks. It's completely free. You can get it off my link in bio. And you can also get our free investigation into the Abbey Gate attacks. A government covered up the Haqqani network's involvement in that attack. So I really think everyone should also read that, because you can see a little bit of the nuance of how the Haqqani network used ISIS as a proxy, just like Al Qaeda now is going to start using a number of terrorist groups as proxies. And we need to start looking at the terrorist groups kind of like the old way we used to look at the Iranian Quds Force. If you start looking at them that way, we can tackle them a lot better. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like to add something to what Scott said. When people ask me, well, why are those sources of you not contacting those three-letter agencies, or why are you not contacting your former employers? And that's very simple, because we, in the last 3 years, we saw our agencies talking with the Taliban, sharing intelligence with the Taliban. So as soon as we start talking about our sources, our agencies are going to ask us, who is this guy? What is his name? Where does he live? How does he know this? When did he meet this and this leader? And we were simply not able to tell them those things without putting our sources into risk. And we made an obligation to them, and they shared information with us. And we know the risk they are having in sharing it with us. And we lost a few people in the last 3 years who took this risk for their country. So when our agencies in the last 3 years asked us, okay, who are the guys that are sharing intelligence with you? We were not even able to give them the names of those sources. And this is really hard to acknowledge, to accept, and we really hope that this is going to change in the coming year. I just want to add that, and especially those guys in Afghanistan who are risking their lives, and those are in most of the cases those are people who are very close to Taliban leadership, Al Qaeda leadership. So they are, as soon as it's been found out that they are sharing intelligence with foreigners, it's their end of their life. And that's something that we really should realize ourselves, that people are risking their lives for us at this moment.
And what I would say to that, Shawn, just to quickly wrap here, is what Guido just said. And I think this is the reason that I'm most concerned about all of this, is just the institutional hubris that will probably get in the way of this new administration coming in, as well intended as it might be. Is that it's a hell of a thing. You talk about some tinfoil hat shit, to think that Sarah, Guido, Legend, Masood have more high fidelity information than the three-letter agencies about this threat. But I would bet my next paycheck on it that they do, right? And again, it's a series of contextual things that have happened, starting with a wholesale systematic abandonment of a 20-year ally and immediate legitimization of a 20-year enemy, right, by the same government. And it's set in motion a range of twilight zone actions that's where we are today. Whether we like it or not, it's where we are. And if we can't wake up to that on both the private public side and realize that our GWAT veterans are actually sitting on the most high level information of the threat picture than any other entity, and figure out a way to bring them into the fold, that is going to be the thing we look back on that caused this to happen, was the inability to get past our own hubris and listen to what the fuck our veterans are trying to tell us.
Yeah, I think we've proven how effective you guys are over and over on the show with the information you're bringing and the information that the federal government lacks. But hey, I want to wrap this up. We've been on here
Shawn,
for over 2 hours.
Shawn, can
Go,
I jump in a
go
little
ahead.
bit? Yeah,
Yep.
I want to tell a little bit of story for the audience, and thank you for bringing me on, and thank you, Jeremy, for bringing me on. Uh, I'm one of the SIV program recipient. I was a linguist from Iraq. I started working for the coalition forces from 2003, and I ended up working with special operation forces, and I send you my basically certifications from 10th group, 5th group, and I ended up being sponsored to come to the United States in 2010. I became a U.S. citizen. Going back to the special operation guy, the 10th group operator, and Sam specifically, I saw your episode the other day, like a couple days ago, and I was watching and listening today. Is absolutely true. I'm pretty, very actually technically savvy. The guy is absolutely 100% true. I'm talking about Sam Shulman. the emails he received, the emails are true. It just depends on who sent it. Uh, I'm not.
We pretty much already covered all the email stuff, man.
Yes. Yes, sir.
We need to move on from that.
Yes, sir.
So,
Yes, sir. Yeah. I.
but I appreciate it. But guys, I'm gonna end this. So it's been a long night. We've all been here. We brought a lot of intel out. We've covered a lot of questions. We brought a lot of answers to some of the confusion that was going on. I appreciate everybody showing up. This was pretty big. We had, I think, 35,000 people on here. So once again, I brought on a all of these people are professionals, and that's who I like working with. So I appreciate everybody showing up, especially the speakers. Thank you all for giving me your time and your insight into this whole thing, and I appreciate it.